Hello and welcome. Today I have a very special guest, Judith Kusel. She is a mystic, high teacher, librarian, author, soul reader in true life and in the inner soul planes. Welcome, Judith.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me and hello to everybody, wherever you are. And thank you so much for being here with us and also for Mary for inviting me. Thank you.
Well, I'm so grateful that you're here. Judith and I have never met. I just started seeing some of her posts and I found them so insightful and so beautiful and really deep. And as I've said many times on this podcast, I started it because I do believe there is a reawakening on the planet, most especially of the divine feminine. And I know this started for me. I was in my mid-30s, which was quite a while ago, but it was very scary because I was very in my traditional religion. That was my foundation. I was from an Irish Catholic neighborhood in Chicago. This is what we believed. This is what we built our lives on. And when my soul started leading me in a different direction, it was very scary because I thought, well, if this isn't true for me anymore, what can I possibly hold on to? And back then there wasn't so much out there. You had to kind of really look in special bookstores and stuff for any information. So what I wanted to do with my podcast and my website, especially, it's very female focused. And I love to have women on that are following non-traditional religious paths and just following their spiritual paths where their soul is leading them. So it's not so scary. So as it's happening, women can say, oh, this is happening to a lot of us, and kind of maybe have a bit more information of how to find their way on their path. And Judith's writings and channelings, everything that I've read about hers, I just found it's very soothing for the soul and very wise. And so I guess, Judith, my first question will be a real softball, which is what is happening on this earth right now?
Well, it's the greatest, transition that humanity has ever been in. We were in the seventh dimension originally. In my Africa book, I was born in Africa, the untold story of Elysium and the Lion Kingdom. That is actually when my life caved in completely. That after 34 years of being librarian, I walked into my office and I was told if I don't vacate my office within 2 hours, it shall be done for me without prior warning. And in went my whole life because I was always very community conscious and also very much in higher service. And with that, I started to see energy lines in the earth. And at that stage, I thought I was going bonkers. To crown it all, I ended up with all the drama that it was at the time when South Africa was going through a lot of political transition, and when Nelson Mandela came in, and so things were very political, very volatile and political at that stage. And so at that stage, I even had death threats coming my way. And you can imagine, what that you are standing on shifting sands. You literally don't know what's going on. And then they took me to the museum for a while where I worked in archives, but I was working with soldiers. British soldiers. I was working with the archives of dead soldiers, and that also brought a whole shift in my life because I was starting to understand, in a deeper sense that this can't go on like that, because everybody gets wounded, in war, nobody is a winner. Everybody is absolutely somebody that loses out somewhere along the line. And as this all happened in my life, and I got to a stage where I was heading for a nervous breakdown, and my doctor said to me, Judith, you've got a choice now. Either you take your life back or you're heading for a nervous breakdown. And I was too young at that stage to go on pension. But I just stood and I asked for guidance, and I stood at the edge of a cliff, and I was there with my higher guides, and they showed me all the thousands of people down in the valley below. And the question was, how long are you going to stand here and not go and do the work that you've come in to do? And at that stage, I was actually shown, how does an eagle learn to fly? And it only learns to fly by the mother kicking it out of its nest. Mm-hmm. And finding its wings to fly. The next day I put in my resignation, and I had no idea where I was going. I had no idea how my life was going to unfold. But I was connecting to the temples of the white flame. I was connecting to all these energy fields. I was downloading stuff. And, you know, for me, who comes also out of a very Christian background and very sort of conservative background, this was quite a mission, because my family didn't understand what I was going through, and I didn't understand what I was going through. But in that, I learned that life is a trusting process. And all I could see is that this was leading into a new form of life, a new way, not only for me, but for the rest of humanity. Because what I was awakening was more than a truth that's ever been told to humankind. And then more than that, it was a deep remembrance, but it was also a consciousness opening for all of us that happened then, because in 2012, that is when we really all started to awakening in a deep way. And I was shown then at that stage, when my life was in this chaos, that that is what would happen to humanity in order for souls to awaken to the truth of who and what they are. And in the last years now, I have been standing on these ancient sites that I was reconnecting with, and understanding that we had that. We had all of that. We had unity, we had oneness, we had peace. And then the wars of heaven broke out. That was the first thing. And then after the war of heavens, when everything was rearranged in this whole universe, the other civilization started to come in, and that was the Lion Kingdom, and then Avalon, then Lemuria, and then Atlantis was the last. And in all of this, we started to go downhill. We sunk more and more into the seas of forgetfulness. And when the great floods occurred, it basically meant that a landmass sank, some went up, Lemuria sank, Atlantis sank. But the memory of all of that was in our souls, because, and we all knew somehow in our deepest memory banks, there is a memory of that utopia, of that paradise. And obviously we've lost it somewhere along the line. But when we really came, the veils of amnesia came down, we all then forgot who and what we are. And we were not taught to really connect to our souls again. And to me, that's now the reawakening of our soul, the reawakening of our memory banks, the awakening of the truth of who and what we are. And as we awaken, we suddenly realize, but wait a minute, this lot doesn't work anymore. And I have been given so many visions of the new earth, and you know how we go back into oneness and unity. And is beautiful back to the connection with earth, with the animals, with the birds, with all of nature. You know, I was as I went through this whole journeys and so on, I started to understand that you can communicate with any type of being. It doesn't matter who they are, telepathically. And I had these moments when I was communicating with the elephants, when I was communicating with the lions, when I was communicating with the whales and the dolphins. And all of them said, you know, you put all the boundaries down. You fenced us in. And we couldn't do the work that we are really created to do. Because the elephants showed me, they said, you know, we walk the ancient elephant paths, but as we walk them, we open up the energy lines of the earth. Now, when you fence us in, we can't do that anymore. And the lions, for instance, with their roars, they open the gates to Sirius, and they open up the consciousness in a way that we do not understand. The whales and the dolphins hold us all in their consciousness now. And they all are ascending. They've already ascended into the new earth. To me, that shows that everything is interconnected. We are not just one cog in the wheel. And by divine decree, this has been decreed that it would happen, that at this time the new earth would come in. And we only got 10 years now in which this process is going to lead us right into the new golden age. So we're right in the time of the greatest configuration, but also transmutation, the transcendent from one form into another, not a conflict, a transfiguration into a totally new body, new form, and a totally new time on earth. But the thing is, it's all the stuff that needs to be released, from all the ages, from all we have ever been before. And that is what now needs to be released. That's why it keeps churning up. And what seems to be chaos is actually just the dissolving of the old structures, the old forms. So we are reborn into that new life and new beginning. And we finally understand that there is only love.
That's very beautifully put. It's interesting. I was in my mid-30s as well when the transition started taking place. And I'm just curious. You said how to, let me get the wording right, how to reconnect with our souls. So I'm in America here, and there's a big election coming up. It's a very scary time for a lot of people. And to me, it's a very clear choice between the same path of hatred and division, and fighting, or unity and love and connectedness. So for those of us who are wondering, and you put everything so beautifully, Judith, I love listening to you speak. What if, because like you said, you were very lost. I used to say that when I went through that in my 30s, when my soul started calling me out of traditional religion, I felt like I was walking in an earthquake. I couldn't find a place to plant my feet that felt safe and right, because everything that I had based my belief system on was now disintegrating before my eyes. So I do believe a lot of people are going through that. So what do they do to, what can they do to find something to hold on to so they're not so frightened?
But first of all, you must remember, I was born into a country at that stage where the apartheid system was implemented. And I mean, if you ever saw divisions, it was South Africa. I mean, when I was working in the library, you had books for Black people, and they had a special label and special date stamps for them. Then you had the ones for the Indian and the Asians. Then you had the white people, and that were their books. And I always thought to myself, a book is a book. How can you define that? But what it did was, as librarian, you actually handle books. And I always read everything that I could, because I was questioning even at that stage. And I realized that we have been told so many lies. And then I had to work with banned books. And then, I always wanted to know why a book was banned, and I started to read it. And then I understood, how much information is being fed to us, how much is actually taken out deliberately that we're not supposed to see and to hear and whatever. And you must remember that at that stage, we were on the brink of civil war. We were on the brink of civil war. We had Caspers are armed vehicles that was patrolling the streets with people with machine guns. We as librarians, when we went into the township, we often had to have armed conduct to go into the township to actually go and take books there. And at that stage, it was so ingrained in your life that it became a way of life. But, when I started working within these communities, and I mean, I grew up from a family that always said, you must never see that person as a skin color, whether they're black or green or blue or red, it doesn't matter. What matters is their soul. Every person has got a soul, and honor the soul in all whom you meet. And when all of this started to happen to me, I thought to myself, now, why did this happen to me? My family has always taught me that. And here I was in the midst of all this drama, in whatever was unfolding. But today I say thank you that that has happened, because it also in that we have been so indoctrinated with this whole thing that we need political parties. And I mean, I was in my early 20s when I always wanted to be a politician. That was my main aim in life. And then I was actually asked to partake in an election campaign in South Africa by the advocate who was standing for parliament, after I had an argument with him. And, that was such an eye-opener to work with these, with how the campaigns were launched. And I shall never forget, I was standing next to one of the most famous cricket players in South Africa. He was about 6'6". And I said to him, Vince, I said, you know what do I do, when all these people come to actually sort of vote here? And he said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, oh, Judith, people just think they've got to vote, but they've got no clue what they're voting for, and also he says, oh, you just put the ballot paper, well, not the real one. He says, well, make your cross here. And he said, Judith, you will not believe me, but they do. And that is the end of
Wait,
politics.
Can you repeat that? Because I want to make sure that I didn't. So he said about the voting. Say that one more time.
Yeah. He said that most people are unconscious, okay? All right. So in other words, yeah. And when the day of the election comes, and that stage, you still had all the radio broadcasts and so on. He said people know that they've got to go and vote. But he said to me, 99% of the people do not know what to do. In other words, they do not know who to vote for, or they've been indoctrinated, by the politicians and said, well, put your cross here. And I thought he was joking. But that day I saw he wasn't joking. He was telling the truth. And to me, that was the saddest thing. To me, that was the saddest thing about the unconsciousness of what we were in. We're awakening now. But I found in the library, people do not question. They always took everything for granted. And whatever somebody with some authority said to them, they believed. In South Africa, we were actually indoctrinated that it said, you do not question your parents, you do not question your teachers, you do not question the church, and you do not question the government.
Yeah, and the church, that's a big one, because I think that's the foundation of everything, because it teaches us to believe in a God that really doesn't exist. And I'm not saying there's not a divine source of love, and it's just unimaginable. In the little tiny experiences I've had, or if you listen to anyone who's had near-death experiences speak of what they encounter, is nothing like this God that we're taught through religion. And I think that's one of the hardest things, is overcoming that there's a God that's going to punish you if you don't do this or you don't do that. And if you're a good person, you go to heaven. If you're a bad person, you're going to burn in hell. It all feels really remedial once you get to the other side, but there's still so many people believing it. And I love what you said, which is what I came to, which is it's almost all lies. Everything we're believing and following as human beings, it's almost the opposite of what's true. That's what I'm coming to. Is that your experience as well?
You know what? I was just thinking to myself with all this thing about, this terrible things that happened in now with this, what wasn't a hurricane? What was it? Yeah, it was a hurricane that hit Carolina and those places. A few years ago, I was supposed to go to America. I've never been in America, but I was going to do seminars in America, and I was also going to sort of go and work with energy lines there and energy portals. And I was actually, that same area that is now hit the worst, I was opening the ancient mounds there. I was the ancient pyramids there, because they all connect to the pyramids and the mounds in Atlantis that's under the sea. Okay. And I actually had to work from Britain, because the Atlantic Ocean didn't exist at first. because when Avalon was, it was still one land mass. There was no Atlantic Sea. So a lot of these ancient energy centers are all connected. Ohio is one of the most important ones in the whole spiel, but it starts in Florida because also with the Gulf of Mexico, there's all these pyramids under the sea. And don't tell me that they didn't discover them. They did. We had a book in the library where they already photographed these pyramids in 1960s. So it's not that they're not existing. They are there. So to me, it was very interesting that it was that area that was most hit until I understood what it was. It's the same thing that happened in Maui, where in your area, in that area, it was the lithium that they want to mine. And that is why Asheville was destroyed. But you can see it everywhere in the way that weather manipulation is even here. I mean, I stood in Paris and I wanted to take a photograph of the Arc de Triomphe, and all I could see was these lines in the sky. And at that stage, we didn't have them in South Africa. And I thought to myself, what the heck is going on here? And I thought to myself, I wonder what Napoleon would have said if we could see all these lines that come in the sky now, here, wherever. But now you see them here in South Africa too. And to me, that shows, that we're going the path of Atlantis again, where they did exactly the same thing. And that is what caused the destruction of Atlantis eventually. But the good news is that the divine already decreed the outcome. We cannot change the outcome. The outcome is already there. Okay? That we will move into the golden age, and we are already there. So it doesn't really matter what anybody else with these death throes that they're now doing, and they're trying their best now to hijack those plans. It's not going to happen. But they also have a role to play. I once, when I was writing my book and I got to the walls of heaven, and where a rebel faction actually broke off from the rest and caused all the havoc, by mind control and that type of thing. And I said, well, where does darkness come from? And then I was taken all this. I've got a whole chapter in my book about it. But something was said to me then, and I'd say this with great love. It says, if the souls choose to play out that role, who are you to judge?
Mm.
And then I understood that darkness does serve in its own way. Because if you take a magnet, it's got a negative pole and it's got a positive pole. And if you cut it in half, it just won't work. You need both poles in order to create the electromagnetic field. So I feel what is happening now in your country is a big awakening. And on the East Coast, it was Atlantis. On the West Coast, it's Lemuria.
So this is interesting. You've mentioned a few things, and I think maybe if it's all right with you, if we can kind of dive into that a little more. You've mentioned Atlantis and Lemuria, and I know that I've read on some of your posts about the East Coast is where Atlantis was. So these are not just fairy tales. Where you're coming from, you're saying these places actually existed. They were very advanced societies, but they lost the soul. Is that right? And it kind of, you know better. So I'm going to let you take it from here. But if you could kind of, for people who are saying, well, I thought those were just made up things or from fairy tales, and you're saying they're real. So can you expand on these different places you're speaking of?
Okay, Lemuria came first, and they were the Pacific, where the Pacific Ocean now is on that side. And they were actually very highly evolved beings. And they didn't have as dense physical form as we are, like we're growing into what we're transforming into. They could actually, but they very much were connected to nature, to Mother Earth. In other words, they didn't harm anything. There was unity and oneness. They were a beautiful race of people who really knew how to communicate. They used to, the ancient civilizations didn't use their vocal cords to speak. They used telepathy. Now, if you lose telepathy, you can't lie because everybody can read your thoughts. They can read your intent, etc. So they actually were so at one with all of life that even, their places or living places were green. They were eco-conscious. They brought it in exactly what we're going to do in the new golden age. But they were very peaceful people. They didn't harm anybody or whatever. But their demise, unfortunately, came with Atlantis rising, because Lemuria was 7th dimensional and Atlantis was 5th. So they were of a much higher consciousness state than the Atlanteans were. But you had in Atlantis, which was rising when Lemuria was already sort of like thousands of years old, Atlantis rose. And that was the 5th root or 6th root race of men. And what happened is they had the golden age where they really and truly lived life in oneness and unity. But then the same old faction that started the war for women and that destroyed the others, it's took over the mind of certain Atlanteans who were the rulers of that time. And then that whole destructive things came. They even went so far as to put control boxes, which are microchips, here in the cranium area of the people. And then they were all connected to this mass computer. And that is where the demise of Atlantis came, because now they could remotely control everybody in that sense. So what is it? Basically a misuse of power. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
While the high priesthood of Atlantis said, no, we can't have this happening. We will stay true to the law of one. Not all of them, but most of them. So what happened is they knew they had to conserve their knowledge. And they did that. They took it to ancient, what we remember as ancient Egypt. They took it to Tibet. They took it to Hawaii, where the kahunas still are, and also to South America, North America, and Africa. So every continent, basically, they went into, and they actually safeguarded it, because they knew the time would come when humanity would sink so low that they would be like the beacons of light that would keep up that light. That is how the mystery schools were formed, because they kept the nucleus of the knowledge, they kept pure. But now, so in others, at that stage, with Lemuria still being there and this fall of Atlantis coming, they decided, well, they've got to break now Atlantis, Lemuria. And at that stage, the Lemurians were very innocent, because they were just basically living life in a much higher way. But they were an androgynous race. In other words, they had the masculine and feminine beautifully balanced, and they did not procreate like we do. We don't understand these things today with our mind, but deep in there's a great remembrance, and it comes through in my soul readings that I do, because at that stage, there was an Atlantean, one of that devised a method of actually splitting the androgynous body in two. So in other words, to make a male half and a female half. And they told the story that it is because God created them in an imperfected form, and by splitting them, they could finally have sex. Okay. Which, of course, was the greatest lie there is. Because once they actually split them, and some of the Lemurians fell for it, they couldn't get back together again. And you find now with these Lemurian souls that often they want to have like that oneness again, with a soul partner, but they can't quite get to them. And that is exactly what happened. And then that broke the Lemurian in a way that they became enslaved by the Atlanteans.
So soulmates are a real thing then, is that what you're saying? Because people have this, and other people make fun of them, like it doesn't exist, but you're saying soulmates do, that's where that longing is coming from?
That is part of the souls, not all of the souls, but it's the Lemurian souls, not all of them, because some of them just refuse to have it. And what I always get, I was actually, when I was doing the remote work, I was taken to where all the sequoias were, are in California. And I saw myself being in that lifetime in these forests that were there. But a lot of the Lemurians had gathered there in the forest, and there's quite a crowd of them. It was quite a big one. And I saw myself as a high priestess standing there in that with a lot of others. And we decided that we would withdraw into a higher dimensional state. So in other words, they just basically, like we do now, transfigure into a higher state. They become invisible to the ones that are lower. So a lot of them didn't leave, but they kept I've always come them across, especially in ancient sites. I call them the ancient ones, because there are souls that actually said, we will not leave this planet, and we will keep on in service until such time as humanity rises into that seventh dimensional state again. So they are assisting humanity through this whole thing in a greater degree. We are never lost, but the greatest collective lesson here is that we mustn't give our power to anybody. In other words, we mustn't give our power away, but we must get the channels open so that because the kingdom of heaven is within you. It's not outside you, it's within you. And that connects to your soul. And the thing is, all of us, a soul, we are birthed by the divine imperfection. And when I say the divine, it's the divine masculine, divine feminine in one divine source. It's a source of energy. And then what happens is the divine only sees your perfection, because the divine did not create something that's imperfect, perfect. And since the moment of your birth, everything that ever was in your soul is still there. It records everything. That's how I can do my soul readings, is I go into those soul records. And all of us actually have a galaxy of origin, a constellation, a star system. We've got our soul group, which if it's a small group, it's 144. But then you have groups that come together, then they are like 144,000. That's where that 144,000 comes from. It's one group. It's a cluster group of souls. And then when you incarnate, that whole memory bank is still there. It's intact. It's not just your soul that has got all the ineffable soul knowledge and talents and abilities of everything that ever happened to your soul in all lives and paralives and universes. So it's never lost. It's right there in your soul. But who has ever taught us that when we were born?
Yeah, that's very true.
Who has ever taught us that when we were born? And as you say, then the church came along. I've been in the church. I love the church. It serves its own way. But we were always taught that we were bad, and that we suffer for our sins. And that is where we actually saw more separation instead of oneness.
Yes, I agree with that. I just want to ask, the things that you talk about, Atlantis, Lemuria, all these beautiful things about the soul splitting and all that. So where do you get your information? Did you sit quietly and it came to you? Did you read? Did you research? How did you go about gathering all this information that is obviously not taught to us here on this plane?
Because of who my soul is. Truth. When you make that reconnecting with your soul in a deepest way, it's always by asking, who am I? Who am I really? Who am I in truth? And that it becomes like a prayer. If you have a prayer, you will always be given that answer. Okay. And you do not need a middleman to actually go and do that for you, because you have direct, connection to your soul and your soul group and to the divine anytime. because there's nothing that stops you from having it. And that is what they taught in the mystery schools all along. That's why Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is within you, is not outside you. And when I was actually going through this time where literally I had nothing. I lost everything that I ever had. I had no money, I had no home, I had nothing. That is the times when I really went deeply and say, well, why did this happen? How did it happen? What is it, that I have to bring to them a humanity? Why is it there? And then I was shown my own soul. I was shown my home galaxy. I was shown who I am in truth. And in your sleep state, you always go back to that who you are in truth. We all serve on intergalactic ways in our sleep state. That's why sometimes you wake up in your morning and you actually feel very tired. It's because you've actually worked, And a lot of us who are light workers, we are helping so many souls now, through this process in ways that you cannot even comprehend. And to me, that is the wonder of creation. That when you start awakening and the higher your consciousness goes, the less the barriers dissipate. And you can access all that you've ever been. You can travel intergalactically through your soul, because your soul is not bound by the physical body. It's not bound by the mind. The mind is finite. It cannot think so far, but your soul simply knows. And once you make that connection, you can access anything under the central sun. And what my soul has always done is when on its earthly lights, I've been an oracle. I
And what
know
does
that.
that mean when you say you've been an oracle?
Well,
What does it mean?
look at this. This in ancient times there were always the oracles, like in Delphi. Delphi is one of the most well-known oracles. And there was one on Isis Island in Egypt. There's one in the desert in Egypt. They had them all over the ancient worlds. And they were specifically women that were trained as high priestesses. A lot of you will recognize yourself. And they were trained from the age of 5 to fully have opened that channel, to remember who and what they are in truth. They never use psychedelics or drugs. You don't need them if you fully open up the channel. And then they could basically tap into, whatever they wish to or whatever is given, and then just simply transmit it. That's what I do. I don't know how the process works exactly, but I know that when I get that information, it's just transmitted through me, and I just type it out, because to me that's quicker than trying to. I can channel with words, but I prefer that because I can type very quickly. And often I will have my journal with me, or I be at ancient sites, and I would tap into that records, because everything is recorded in energy fields. And all ancient sites have got energy fields. It's recorded in the rocks. It's encoded in every single living being. And you must just, when your consciousness is there, there's no barriers. You can actually, you can access whatever you wish to, but you will always find that you will access what is there to serve you. In other words, what you don't need to know, you don't need to know, but you will given what you need to know at exactly the moment that you need to know it.
That makes a lot of sense. And that's one thing I absolutely have discovered myself, and I believe with every ounce of my being, is we have the answers within us. We don't need to go running around. We're not supposed to put anyone up on a pedestal. All these people that run these religious organizations, that's not the way it's supposed to. Nobody is holier than anyone else. No one is more sacred than anyone else. I don't care about your degrees or what you know, or if you've been meditating on a mountain your entire life. We are all equally sacred. That's one thing that's come really clear to me. So I want to ask you, you talk about these soul readings, and that's what you do. One of the things that you do. So if I'm someone and I think it sounds interesting, but I don't understand, maybe I'm a little nervous. What does that mean? You're going to look into my soul. Can you explain if someone contacts you and says, Judith, I would like a soul reading. Can you tell me what that entails and what I'm going to benefit from it? Why would I do this?
Well, when you book a soul reading, I always ask, three things because I need your date of birth. It came to me, as I say, when I was like being revamped into my true self. I always did angel card readings, but just for fun. I didn't do that because of reading. And then when I had to put my life together again, the abilities came back, given to me. I believe it was because I had to go through the time where everything that I ever was before, like dissipates like you do, and suddenly my gifts came back. That's how I see it. Until I realized, but I only need people's date of birth. I need their name of birth. What they've the given name, because before you incarnate, you actually transmit your name that you want to be called to your parents, whether it's the father or the mother. I know this is true in my case. And then, and when you really look at the high meaning of the name, it will actually fit into your soul name. But your soul name actually is sacred geometry. We all have it here written on our forehead. And that is why you always, this part of you is what stays with you through all incarnations. And that's how you actually recognize other souls. But then I will ask you, do you have any questions? They basically just short thing, because the less I know about people, the better, and not to tell me stories, because, stories are stories we tell for each other and we repeat them over and over again. We really have to get to the crux of what the soul in truth is. Mm-hmm. And to me, then I give you the soul name, which is actually the sacred geometrical sign. I always see myself and my true soul state as having this on my forehead. Everybody has it. That's how you know and recognize another soul. We always think it's the eyes, but it's actually this part of your whole face. And that symbol stays with you eternally. It's because the language of the universe is sacred geometry. And sacred geometry also contains sound. I give you your soul sound, your tonal chord, because that is not only on the sound that you vibrate at, because remember in the beginning, there was a word and the word was sound. Okay, that's basically what it is before light was even created. So it gives you your soul group, your soul name, your soul group that you belong to, and then it gives you your tonal chord, which is that very important chord. If you start humming it or you listen to music at that frequency, that will always lift you into a higher altered state, just by listening to it, or even humming or singing it. And then you have got your soul colors. Now remember, soul colors is light, but you always will reflect also the sound and colors of your own galaxy or star system of origin. So you are eternally connected to your home, your true home. That's why a lot of us, when we are born, we feel this deep longing for home, but we can't really say, well, where's home? But we are always connected to our soul family, because only a tiny fraction of you is incarnated on Earth. You've got 12 soul fires, and only one part normally incarnates. So the other parts are working all over the universe. They're still existing. It's not because it's fine, but then you're also part of that greater soul group. Now, and then according to that, and to whatever comes through, most people through their questions will often ask for specific relationships or whatever they have, because we carry those relationships over lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, especially if we created negative patterns with them. That's why sometimes you meet somebody and they trigger something in you and you've got no idea where that comes from. That's because your soul recognizes them, and the people that challenge you the most are actually the ones that agree to play out that role, so that they become like a mirror, and you can actually mirror back to you that you have not loved and owned within yourself, because everybody is a reflection of you. You are everything. I went to Dr. DeMartini's courses, and that's reading it, he says that you have every single human trait already exists within you. You can't deny it. You might, for instance, not be a killer can kill somebody physically, but how many times do we kill people with our thoughts, with our feelings? The same thing. You don't need to do it physically. So it actually is immensely freeing, because it starts showing you your wholeness, your shadow and your light. You know, we're not just one light. We need the shadow and the light to balance each other out. That's why you have the masculine and feminine, the right brain and the left brain. And once that is in balance, you are in equilibrium. And that is what we're returning to, is that state of equilibrium. But mostly what comes through is lately, I've had in the last few months been able to, because as the consciousness rises and as you rise, you start tapping into higher energy fields. So I've even found that universal knowledge now comes through. You know what your soul really does when it is in the universal realm. And mostly it will reflect what you are here to do on this planet anyway, because that's exactly what you see. Your soul is created according to what the divine wishes you to reflect back to the divine. In other words, the source energy can only experience its own creation through you, through the specific attributes that it put into your soul. And that's so important to remember, that whatever you are meant to bring into the earth is also reflected in divinity. Not only in the source itself, but in all of creation, because you are all of creation, and all of creation is you. And so often it will pinpoint areas in all your lifetimes, or what you now need to clear in order to be free of that. And once you actually start, it's always forgiveness for yourself, forgiveness for others, letting go of all shame and blame and guilt. And that's exactly where we suffer the most, is because we cannot forgive ourselves for something that happened, and then we blame ourselves and we shame ourselves, and then we get into this, and we do that to other people as well, and we get into the victim mode. But you know, the victim mode is the worst that you can get into.
Yep.
I remember when all of that was happening to me, I was really feeling very sorry for myself. And my best friend came out, she said, well, Judy, you can stand there for the rest of your life, or you can sit there in the mud and feel sorry for yourself for the rest of your life, or you can get up, dust yourself down, and get on with the business of life. I was very cross with her, but I tell you what, I did get up and went on with life. And, you know, it's immensely freeing if you realize how much, and that is where all the guilt and shame comes from, is because we believed we were bad, you know. But it's just wrong decisions that we made along the way. And from every so-called wrong is when you actually learn something, because that's how you master soul lessons.
Very true. You know, I remember I come from a family, very big family, but you know, there was alcoholism and a lot of violence. And I've worked so hard since I was very young to heal, to release, and there's so much shame and guilt, you know, when you're raised in that kind of environment. And one time in meditation, I was asking, please, I just wanted to be free, because I felt the weight of that shame and guilt and blame that I was carrying. And I can't undo my past. How do I free myself? And I got this image of both of my parents on their knees in front of me crying and saying, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And what I understood was that wasn't going to change anything. It doesn't matter if the person who hurt you or caused the damage is sorry, or, you know, it helps. My father did stop drinking like that. And before he died, I took care of him before he died. It was a beautiful full circle healing relationship. But what I realized, and that's the beauty of it, is we don't have to depend on anyone else to be free. We free ourselves. It doesn't mean that we take on the blame, but we're responsible for the healing. That's just the way it is. We are responsible for the healing. And that's the best part, because if we had to depend on someone else, we would be enslaved forever and waiting for them to do what they needed to do to free us. So that was a huge lesson for me. And I was able to much forgiveness, because they were beautiful people, but they were very damaged too. My parents, of course, all my siblings and everything. And that was so freeing to me to realize nothing they're going to do is going to heal me. It helps if they say I'm sorry or acknowledge it, but that's not going to heal me. That had to come from right within me and my connection with divine spirit. So I love that you put it that way. And before we wrap up, I do want to ask you, I find it very interesting because there's so much information out there now. Sometimes I have to pull back from all of it because there's so much and everyone has a different belief. And that's why we have to just trust what's inside us. But I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on, because there are a lot of spiritual teachers who, like, you wake up every morning and you envision what you want and you write it down and you put your order into the universe and you focus on that, and that's how you manifest it. And then there's other spiritual teachers who say, just let go, go with the flow, say yes to everything, and, you know, just trust that the divine will deliver. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on destiny and just let it go and it's going to happen, or manifest your own destiny and you decide what you want and then make it happen. What would be your thoughts?
Well, you know, we had free will and choice, but that's now overridden. We're in a totally new timeline since about a week or two ago. And in other words, where divine will is our will, because this plan is going through now, whether we like it or not. Okay. It doesn't mean that you now have to do exactly what it is, but you will always be brought back to it, because the divine master plan is going into fulfillment, because it's basically decreed that the new earth shall rise, is already risen. The new earth is already here since the 5th of July 2020, and the new age, the golden age is already here. It's just a matter of keeping your focus on it. But I know all about manifestation, but I have found that these times, because of everything being in such great flux, the best laid plans go awry. I find that I can't, I plan ahead, but then everything goes haywire anyway. So it's also teaching us that there's a greater plan here at work. There's a greater flow. And you're not going to be like water. You've got to be able to flow. Water finds even a way to get through sheer rock. Okay. So if you are like water, water carries memory, it carries sound, it carries everything. And the thing is that if you become fluid, if you're flexible, not inflexible, then you get hurt. Okay, some kind or other. But water finds a way around, in and around everything. But I do. What I do is I always say, if I ask for something or wish to have something manifest, it's something that I really truly believe in, and that's so important. It is always to ask that this be answered in the highest and best ways for the highest good of all concerned. Because we have moved from the I into the we. You cannot create unity if you want to put your will into something, but it's going to harm somebody else. And to me, that always makes me remember that when I was working at the museum, the lady who had the restaurant, she loved jigsaw puzzles, and she always did these huge ones. And, everybody was always tempted to go and put in pieces, and then she would say, come on, leave my jigsaw puzzle alone. But one day she actually called me, and she had this huge one, and there was one single piece missing. And then she said to me, I cannot frame this and I can never complete this because of the one missing piece. And then I understood that is what we are. We are all these pieces in the jigsaw puzzle, the giant cosmic one, and we slot in exactly where we need to be. And sometimes we want something to manifest instantly, but all the other pieces still have to get in where they need to be, and we're trying to force the issue here. That's why it's so important to surrender and say, well, this is for the highest good. In other words, I'm not going to hurt or harm anybody in this process. Everything will come into one flow. It will move into one beautiful creation as it should.
That's so
You can
beautifully put. I'm sorry, did
Yeah.
you want to say something else?
No, so in other words, you can still put the intent out. You can release it, but always add that proviso in the highest and best ways for the highest good of all concerned. And then miracles happen.
Thank you so much, Judith. Now, how can people get in touch with you?
Okay, they can go, well, I'm on Facebook. It's my name, Judith Kusel. I always post there. And then they can go to my website, which is http whatever, www.myname and then com. And all the information is there, you know, about my soul readings, my books, my courses, and also the webinars that I have once a month. Yeah, and then they can book whatever they want to. Or
Yes, and
read
I would
whatever
like
they
to add,
want
if
to.
you are on Facebook, friend Judith on there, and you have thousands and thousands of followers, because what she posts is very beautiful, insightful, and helpful. So thank you so much for being here, Judith. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and may you be blessed in all that you do, and may this whole website of yours touch hearts and souls all over the world. Thank you.